Hey guys, today I'm going to tell you a story so disturbing that you'll start questioning everything you know about royalty. We all imagine queens as graceful, elegant women dining on golden plates with the finest wines and sweet delicacies, right? But what if I told you there was one queen whose taste was darker than death itself? Imagine this, a magnificent palace filled with gold, glitter, and power, but deep inside that palace, there's a room. A room where no sunlight enters, only the flickering glow of candles. And right there in the middle sits the queen, beautiful, mesmerizing, with eyes that could enslave any king. But on the plate in front of her, not fruits, not desserts. No, there's something crawling, something alive, a snake. And before anyone can even blink, she picks it up with her bare hands, lifts it to her lips, and bites its head off. Raw. Guys, this is not a horror movie. This is a dark secret from history, a secret that historians have tried to bury for centuries. Today, you're going to discover the terrifying truth about a queen who had a deadly obsession, eating raw snakes and lizards. And trust me, this wasn't just a habit, it was a ritual soaked in blood, mystery, and power. So are you ready? Because once you hear this, you can never unhear it. Hey guys, today I'm going to tell you a story so disturbing that you'll start questioning everything you know about royalty. We all imagine queens as graceful, elegant women dining on golden plates with the finest wines and sweet delicacies, right? But what if I told you there was one queen whose taste was darker than death itself? Imagine this, a magnificent palace filled with gold, glitter, and power. But deep inside that palace, there's a room. A room where no sunlight enters, only the flickering glow of candles. And right there in the middle sits the queen, beautiful, mesmerizing, with eyes that could enslave any king. But on the plate in front of her, not fruits, not desserts, no. There's something crawling, something alive, a snake, and before anyone can even blink, she picks it up with her bare hands, lifts it to her lips, and bites its head off. Raw. Guys, this is not a horror movie. This is a dark secret from history. A secret that historians have tried to bury for centuries. Today, you're going to discover the terrifying truth about a queen who had a deadly obsession, eating raw snakes and lizards. And trust me, this wasn't just a habit. It was a ritual soaked in blood, mystery, and power. So, are you ready? Because once you hear this, you can never unhear it. Now, you must be wondering, why would a queen who could afford the rarest delicacies in the world choose to eat raw, living snakes and lizards? The answer is far more terrifying than you think. You see, in the forgotten pages of history, there are whispers of an ancient ritual, a ritual believed to grant eternal beauty and power. According to this belief, if a ruler consumed the life force of a living creature while it was still breathing, that energy would transfer to them. They would become stronger, more powerful, and almost immortal. And this queen, she wasn't just obsessed with beauty, she was obsessed with control. Legends say she would whisper prayers to a serpent goddess before every feast. Some even claim she believed snakes carried the essence of rebirth because they shed their skin and live again. To her, eating them raw meant stealing that power for herself. But this ritual wasn't just about snakes. Sometimes lizards were brought in, sometimes even stranger creatures. And the queen made sure these feasts were never witnessed by anyone, except those who wouldn't live to tell the tale. But here's the real horror, guys. The night the maid saw her was just the beginning, because what happened after that will chill you to the bone. The young maid thought she could escape. She thought she could run through those long corridors, out of the palace gates, and never look back. But what she didn't know was that the queen had eyes everywhere. The moment the maid left the chamber, the queen didn't chase her. She didn't scream. She didn't even move. She just smiled, a cold, sinister smile. Then she whispered something under her breath, words in that strange language again, and within seconds, 2 royal guards appeared. They didn't need an explanation. They knew what had to be done. By the time the maid reached the stables, they caught her. She begged for her liet. Tears streaming down her face, swearing she would never tell anyone what she saw. But promises didn't matter in this palace. Secrets were worth more than lives. The guards dragged her back inside, not to the dungeon, not to a cell, but back to that same chamber. The queen was still there, calm, sitting with blood on her lips like a predator waiting for its prey. The snakes were gone now. The tray was empty, and on that tray was something new, a sharp silver dagger. The queen walked slowly toward the maid, her silk gown brushing the floor, and then she said in a voice that still echoes through history, "If you see what no one should see, then you must become what you fear." What happened next? Some say the queen made the maid eat what she ate. Others say she ended her life and buried her body under the palace floors. But the truth is far darker than either of those stories. The maid knelt on the cold marble floor, trembling, her heart pounding so hard it echoed in her ears. She was still hoping for mercy, still hoping that the queen would forgive her. But the queen wasn't a woman anymore in that moment. She looked like something else, something inhuman. The queen leaned down, her face inches away from the maid's ear, and whispered, "Your voice will belong to the gods now." Then the guards forced the maid onto the table, her screams muffled by their hands. The silver dagger gleamed under the candlelight. But the queen didn't strike her heart. No, she cut her tongue out first, because for the queen, silence wasn't enough. She wanted to make sure the maid could never speak again. Blood pooled on the floor as the maid's cries turned into faint gurgles. The queen then did something that still sends chills down the spine of every historian who has heard this story. She took the severed tongue, held it high, and dropped it into a bowl filled with snake blood. Then she whispered the same strange words she had spoken before, calling upon the serpent goddess. And then she ate it, slowly, deliberately, like it was part of the ritual. The maid's body? Some say it was chopped into pieces and fed to the snakes in the next feast. Others believe the queen buried her under the palace, sealing her with charms so her soul could never escape. But here's the terrifying part, guys. This wasn't the only time the queen did this. There were others, many others. After that night, something changed in the queen. Her hunger grew. It was no longer enough to just taste the flesh of snakes and lizards. No, now she wanted more. She wanted blood that carried human fear. The whispers inside the palace began. Servants started disappearing. Stable boys, chambermaids, even guards vanishing without a trace. The official word was that they had run away. But the truth? Were taken to that secret chamber. The queen believed something twisted. That fear made the blood stronger. The more terrified the victim, the more power she gained by consuming them, or even a part of them. That's why the ritual always began the same way, with silence, darkness, and whispers in that strange language that no one understood. Some historians say those words were a forgotten dialect of an ancient serpent cult. Others claim it wasn't a language at all, but an incantation, black magic passed down through generations. And here's the chilling part. Every ritual ended with the same act. After eating the snakes, after drinking their blood, the queen would take something human, a piece of flesh, a drop of blood, or sometimes an entire organ. Guys, imagine this. In a palace full of music, laughter, and royal banquets, deep below in a hidden chamber, screams were echoing through the night, and no one dared to question where they came from. For years, the queen's secret stayed buried deep within the marble walls of her palace. The servants who disappeared were forgotten. The guards who questioned too much were never seen again. It was as if the palace had swallowed them whole. But evil has a way of leaving traces, and this secret was too dark to remain hidden forever. It started with the villagers who lived near the palace. At night, when the wind was still, they claimed they could hear faint screams echoing from underground, carried by the cold breeze. At first, they dismissed it as superstition, but then they started finding things, strange things. The remains of snakes and lizards near the palace walls, not dead by natural means, but ripped apart as if by human teeth. Some of the pieces were still warm when they were discovered. Then came the rumors, stories about the queen's beauty, that she never aged, that her skin was as flawless as the day she became queen. Some villagers whispered that she had made a deal with the devil. Others believed she was not even human anymore. And then, a traveler came to the village, a man who once worked in the palace but had escaped. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, like someone who had stared into hell itself, and the first words he spoke froze the blood of everyone who heard them. The queen eats them alive. The villagers didn't believe him at first, but then he showed them something that made their hearts stop, a silver pendant, soaked in dried blood, a pendant that belonged to one of the missing maids. For years, the queen's secret stayed buried deep within the marble walls of her palace. The servants who disappeared were forgotten. The guards who questioned too much were never seen again. It was as if the palace had swallowed them whole. But evil has a way of leaving traces, and this secret was too dark to remain hidden forever. It starts. Ted with the villagers who lived near the palace. At night, when the wind was still, they claimed they could hear faint screams, echoing from underground, carried by the cold breeze. At first, they dismissed it as superstition, but then they started finding things. Strange things. The remains of snakes and lizards near the palace walls, not dead by natural means, but ripped apart as if by human teeth. Some of the pieces were still warm when they were discovered. Then came the rumors, stories about the queen's beauty, that she never aged, that her skin was as flawless as the day she became queen. Some villagers whispered that she had made a deal with the devil. Others believed she was not even human anymore. And then, a traveler came to the village. A man who once worked in the palace but had escaped. His face was pale, his eyes hollow like someone who had stared into hell itself, and the first words he spoke froze the blood of everyone who heard them. The queen eats them alive. The villagers didn't believe him at first, but then he showed them something that made their hearts stop. A silver pendant, soaked in dried blood, a pendant that belonged to one of the missing maids. The travelers' words spread like wildfire. By morning, every villager knew the story. They whispered it in hushed tones, terrified that the walls themselves might have ears. Mothers kept their children inside. Farmers stopped bringing supplies to the palace. The land was drowning in fear. And the queen, she knew. She always knew. When the whispers reached the palace, her rage was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Servants said the walls shook as she screamed, her voice echoing like thunder in the halls. But anger wasn't her only weapon. Fear was, and she was about to use it like never before. That night, the palace guards stormed into the village under the cover of darkness. They dragged people from their homes, the loudest ones, the ones who dared to speak. They burned their houses, tore their mouths open, and hung their bodies from the trees as a warning. And in the center of the chaos stood the queen, dressed in black, her eyes glowing in the firelight, like a demon born from the flames. She didn't speak a word. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough to silence the screams. But there was one person she wanted most, the traveler. When they found him, he was hiding in a barn, clutching a rusty dagger like it could save him. But nothing could save him now. They dragged him to the palace, chains cutting into his skin, and what happened next became the darkest chapter of the queen's reign. They brought him to the chamber, the same chamber where screams were swallowed by stone walls. The traveler's legs were shaking so badly that the guards had to drag him across the cold marble floor. The candles flickered as the door slammed shut behind him. And then, there she was, the queen, sitting on her velvet throne, draped in black silk that shimmered like a serpent's skin. Her lips curved into a smile that froze the blood in his veins. The traveler tried to speak "Bo," but his words died in his throat when he saw what lay on the table before her. 2 live snakes, their bodies twisting in silver bowls, and beside them, a blade. Not just any blade, this one was black as night, its edge glinting with something unholy. The queen rose slowly, every step echoing like a drumbeat of death. She circled the traveler, her voice soft, almost soothing. "You spoke my truth to the world, and now you will feed the gods." The guards pinned him to the table. His screams bounced off the walls, but no one outside would ever hear them. The queen began the ritual, whispering in that cursed language, calling upon the serpent goddess. She picked up the first snake, holding it above her head, its body writhing as she sank her teeth into its flesh. Blood dripped down her chin as she chewed, her eyes rolling back in ecstasy. Then, she turned to him. She carved symbols into his skin with the black blade, each cut releasing streams of blood that ran into a silver chalice. And then, she drank it, every last drop. But that wasn't the end. No, the horror was only beginning, because after the ritual, she kept his skull, dipped in gold, placed on the altar as an offering, a warning to anyone who dared to betray her. After the traveler's death, something changed inside the queen. The ritual had awakened something far darker than anyone could imagine. Her hunger was no longer satisfied by snakes and lizards alone. She had tasted fear. She had tasted human blood. And now, she craved it. Servants noticed the change first. Her feasts grew stranger. Whole animals were brought to her chambers, not cooked, not roasted, but alive. Rabbits, birds, even foxes. She would rip them apart with her bare hands, her face smeared with blood like a beast wearing a crown. Then came the whispers among the royal advisors. They were the most loyal men in the kingdom, but even they began to fear her. She rarely attended court now. Days passed with no sign of her, and when she did appear, she looked different. Her skin glowed unnaturally, her eyes burned with a feral light, and her nails, longer, sharper than before, scratched the golden throne whenever she sat. One advisor, the bravest among them, tried to speak to her. He warned her that people were afraid that rumors were spreading again. The queen listened in silence. Then she smiled, and when she smiled, he knew he had made a mistake. That night, he vanished, and the next morning the palace cooks reported something terrifying. The queen had demanded meat for her breakfast, not pork, not lamb, but something warm, something fresh. The advisor's signet ring was never found, but days later, the queen was seen wearing a new necklace, one that glinted like polished bone. The kingdom was crumbling under fear. Villages whispered of curses, trade routes were abandoned, and inside the palace, the queen's closest advisors knew one thing: if they didn't stop her, the throne would fall and take them with it. So a secret council was formed. 5 men, each sworn to silence, gathered in the dead of night beneath the palace catacombs. Their faces were pale, ear hands shaking as they planned the unthinkable to kill the queen. They knew it wouldn't be easy. She was always surrounded by guards, and her chambers were protected by rituals no one could explain. Some said even steel couldn't pierce her skin anymore, but they had a plan. They would poison her. Not with ordinary poison. She was far too clever for that. This would be something rare, something deadly enough to kill a god, an extract from a plant that grew only in the depths of the eastern swamps, black widow root, a poison so lethal that even a single drop could stop a heart in seconds. The council bribed a cook, a man desperate enough to risk everything. The plan was simple: slip the poison into her wine during the next royal banquet. No one would suspect a thing. But the queen, she wasn't like anyone else. She had instincts sharper than any serpent. And the night of the banquet, when the golden goblets were raised and the music filled the air, she smiled, because she already knew. The trap had been set, but not for her. The banquet was magnificent. Golden chandeliers blazed like suns. Tables overflowed with exotic fruits, roasted meats, and goblets of crimson wine. The 5 conspirators sat at the queen's table, their faces pale but smiling, trying to hide their fear behind hollow laughter. The cook moved through the hall, his hands trembling as he poured wine into the queen's cup. A single drop of black widow root poison swirled in the crimson liquid. Silent, invisible, deadly. The conspirators exchanged quick glances. This was it. The nightmare was ending. The queen lifted her goblet. Her eyes shimmered like molten gold as she smiled at each of them. Slowly, she raised the cup to her lips, and then she stopped. She placed the goblet back on the table and said in a voice that froze every drop of blood in their bodies, "To loyalty, and to those who forget what it means." Before anyone could react, she clapped her hands. The doors slammed shut with a deafening crash. The music stopped. The hall fell silent. Guards stepped forward, not to protect the council, but to surround them. The conspirators tried to speak, but their voices were drowned by the queen's laughter, a sound that didn't belong to a human throat. She walked to the table, picked up the poisoned goblet, and handed it to the first conspirator. "Drink," she whispered. He refused. She smiled wider, and in the next second, the guards held him down and forced the poison past his lips. His body convulsed, foam spilling from his mouth as he collapsed, dead. One by one, it happened to all of them. 5 men, 5 screams, 5 lifeless bodies sprawled across the marble floor. And then the queen gave the command no one will ever forget. "Skin them." The guards obeyed. The conspirators' flesh was stripped, their bones crushed. And later that night, in the deepest chamber of the palace, the queen feasted again. But this time, and she didn't eat snakes, she ate traitors. After that night, the palace changed forever. The screams of the conspirators echoed in the halls for days, and every servant who survived that feast swore an oath of silence or vanished without a trace. But the queen was no longer the woman they once served. She stopped appearing in public altogether. The throne room stood empty. Court sessions were canceled, and yet strange noises came from her chambers at night, hissing, slithering, and low, guttural growls that sounded almost inhuman. Those who dared peek through the cracks of her doors spoke of something that defied nature. The queen's body was changing. Her nails had grown into black claws. Her eyes, once a shade of royal blue, now glowed like molten amber. Some swore her tongue forked when she spoke. She demanded live offerings every night. Snakes, lizards, wolves, even deer dragged screaming into her chambers. No fire touched the meat. No knife sliced it. She tore into them with her teeth, her face smeared crimson, her silken gowns soaked in blood. The royal priests begged her to stop. They claimed the rituals had gone too far, that the spirits she had called upon were taking her soul. She laughed in their faces and told them she was no longer human, that she had become what she was always meant to be, the mother of serpents. From that day forward, she forbade anyone from calling her queen. She demanded to be worshipped. And those who refused? They joined the bones in the palace catacombs, chewed clean. It didn't take long for the entire kingdom to feel the weight of her madness. Villagers whispered of cursed winds sweeping from the palace, carrying the smell of blood and rot. Crops withered. Rivers turned dark. And those who traveled near the royal grounds never returned. Merchants abandoned the capital. Nobles fled in the dead of night. The roads became silent, except for the sound of wagons loaded with live animals bound for the queen's private chambers. Every day, more livestock vanished, and soon, when there were no more animals to take, people began disappearing. They were mostly servants at first, then farmers, then soldiers who spoke out. They were dragged screaming into the palace, never to be seen again. Some claimed to hear muffled cries at midnight, followed by the low crunch of bones breaking between teeth. Fear turned into rebellion. Small groups of villagers armed themselves with torches and blades, swearing to end the queen's reign. But none returned. Days later, their severed heads appeared on iron spikes outside the palace gates, each one with eyes gouged out and tongues split in two, just like a serpent's fork. The queen's legend spread beyond her borders. Foreign kings called her the demon monarch. Sailors swore they saw black ships carrying cages filled with living bodies headed to her shores. It was no longer a kingdom, it was a graveyard ruled by something no longer human. And yet, through all the horror, one question haunted those who still lived. What was she becoming? Because if she was no longer a queen, what new nightmare was awakening in her blood? Desperation forced the neighboring kingdoms to act. They sent a man, one of their finest spies, into the palace. His mission was simple: confirm the rumors and report back, but what he found no man should have seen. He entered under the guise of a merchant and bribed his way past the outer gates. For 3 days, he moved like a shadow through the hollow halls, noting the decay, the stench, the silence. The grand palace that once rang with music and laughter was now a mausoleum, its walls streaked with dark stains, its floors littered with bones no one had bothered to bury. On the 4th night, he crept toward the queen's private chamber. The massive doors were sealed with black iron, carved with symbols that writhed like living serpents when touched. He waited until the guards were gone, then slipped inside. What he saw froze the blood in his veins. The chamber was a cavern of horrors. Candles dripped black wax onto piles of skulls. A pit yawned in the center, glowing red like the mouth of hell. And around it, the queen writhed, not as a woman, but as something else entirely. Her skin was pale and slick, glistening like a serpent's scales. Her arms were long, boneless, twisting in ways no human limbs should. Her jaw could unhinge, stretching wide enough to swallow a man whole. And in her mouth, dozens of needle-like teeth gleamed in the firelight. The spy clamped his hand over his mouth to stop the scream clawing its way up his throat. But then she turned her head. She saw him. In that moment, he realized the truth. She hadn't just eaten snakes, she had become one. Her eyes burned like molten gold as her voice slithered through the dark. Another offering. The guards found his torn body the next day at the base of the palace gates. His face twisted in a silent scream, his eyes missing. No one dared touch him. The spy's death was the final warning. Word spread like wildfire through the neighboring realms. The queen had become a demon, a creature that defied nature itself. And so, for the first time in centuries, rival kingdoms set aside their feuds and forged an alliance, not for gold, not for power, but for survival. An army of 10,000 men marched toward the queen's domain, armed with steel, fire, and faith. Priests carried sacred relics said to ward off evil. Alchemists mixed flames that could burn through bone. Every soldier swore an oath, cut off the serpent's head. The march took 7 days. Along the way, they passed villages choked with silence, homes rotting in the sun, and fields crawling with black serpents that seemed to watch their every move. Some soldiers swore they heard whispers in the wind, voices that begged them to turn back, or promised eternal power if they didn't. When they reached the capital, they found no city, only a wasteland of ash and bone. The once proud palace loomed ahead, its spires broken, its gates warped like melted steel, and from within those ruins came the sound of hissing. The generals ordered the catapults loaded with flaming pitch. The first barrage crashed against the palace walls, fire licking the ancient stones. The men cheered until the flames died instantly, smothered by a black mist that rolled out like a living thing. Then came the laughter, low, guttural, inhuman, and the gates creaked open. The queen stepped out, or what was left of her. Her body had grown, towering, twisted, covered in scales that shimmered like molten gold and oil. Her arms ended in talons, her face a grotesque mask of beauty and horror, her mouth stretching wide as she hissed one word that froze the army in place: feast. The ground split beneath their feet as black serpents erupted by the hundreds, slithering and coiling around the soldiers, dragging them screaming into the darkness. Steel shattered, torches went out. The night became a pit of screams and blood. The battlefield became a slaughterhouse. Serpents as thick as tree trunks tore through the ranks, snapping men in half with bone-crunching bites. Horses reared, eyes rolling white in terror, before being dragged into the earth. The soldiers fought desperately, blades flashing, arrows whistling, but every strike seemed useless. Their weapons barely pierced the creature's shimmering scales, and when they did, the wounds sealed instantly as if the beasts drank their own blood to heal. Above them, the queen towered, a vision of living nightmare. Her laughter rolled like thunder as her body twisted and grew, sprouting more limbs, her torso elongating into a monstrous coil. Her jaw split wider, unhinging completely as she swallowed men whole, their screams muffled by her endless throat. Each time she devoured a soul, her scales glowed brighter, her form becoming more grotesque and powerful, like a god born from sin. "Fall back! Fall back!" the generals screamed, but retreat was impossible. The ground opened like a living mouth, swallowing men and horses alive. Flames turned to smoke as the black mist smothered every torch, plunging the battlefield into a darkness alive with hissing voices. By dawn, the army was gone. 10,000 men reduced to blood, bone, and silence, but not all perished. A handful of soldiers crawled from the carnage, broken and bleeding, their eyes wide with madness. They had seen the truth. The queen was no longer human. She was something older, something from the deep pits of the earth. And as they fled into the wilderness, they carried with them a secret so terrifying that it could unmake kingdoms. She was breeding. In the depths of that ruined palace, among the piles of bones and rivers of blood, the queen was not alone. Hay had seen the eggs, massive, pulsating, black as obsidian, nestled in coils of living flesh. Dozens of them, hundreds, each one quivering with life. The survivors stumbled into the nearest kingdom like ghosts, emaciated, blood-stained, their armor cracked and faces hollow. They were not soldiers anymore. They were broken men carrying a nightmare no one wanted to hear. "The Queen!" one gasped before collapsing in the throne room of King Erevan. His dying words were burned into the hall like a curse. "She's not human, and she's not alone." The council laughed at first, dismissing the tale as madness brought on by battle. But then came the evidence: scales like steel, fangs the length of daggers, and a severed serpent head that twitched even in death. Whispers spread like disease. Priests declared omens of the world's end. Merchants fled the roads. Mothers locked their doors and prayed their children would not dream of snakes. And then the ground began to tremble. Reports flooded in from across the realm. Black serpents slithering through rivers, swallowing livestock whole. Whole villages vanished overnight, leaving only blood-stained earth and spirals of shed skin. Travelers swore they saw giant shapes moving beneath the soil, as if the earth itself had come alive. But the most terrifying news came from a hunter who ventured too close to the queen's ruined city. He returned pale as death, trembling like a leaf in a storm. "They're hatching," he whispered. "The eggs, hundreds of them. She sings to them at night." And then he slit his own throat before anyone could ask more. The truth became undeniable. The queen's brood was awakening, creatures born of darkness, venom, and blood. Not mere serpents, but monsters that would crawl from the bowels of the earth to devour kingdoms whole. And at their head, their mother, the immortal queen, who feasted on men like meat and ruled the shadows like a god. And as the last sun set on the horizon that day, something answered her song, a roar, deep and ancient, rising from Taung, the depths of the earth. The war had not ended. It had only begun. The night of the blood moon arrived like an omen carved into the heavens. The sky burned crimson, and the wind carried a stench of rot and venom. Across the dead lands where her palace once stood, a new fortress of bone and scale had risen, a living cathedral of writhing serpents, their bodies woven into black walls that pulsed with breath. Inside, the queen waited, but she was no longer the woman they once crowned in silk and gold. Her beauty had been devoured by hunger, twisted into something magnificent and monstrous. Her face stretched into a serpent's maw, jeweled eyes glowing like molten emeralds. Her body was a titan of flesh and scales, coils that could crush mountains, wings of shadow that blotted out the stars. She stood before the brood, hundreds of her spawn now grown and snarling, their fangs dripping with venom that hissed as it burned through stone. And in that moment the world understood a truth older than time. This was not a queen. This was a god born of blood and darkness, awakened from the pit of the earth to reclaim her dominion. The kingdom sent armies, hundreds of thousands of men marching with banners and steel. They came with fire, with faith, with fury. And they were erased, devoured in waves of scales and fangs, drowned in seas of venom. Cities crumbled, rivers turned black. The skies filled with the screams of the dying. And above it all, the queen laughed. Her voice shook the mountains, shattered the stars. "This is my feast. This is my eternity." By the year's end, no kingdom remained, only ruins and silence, broken by the endless hiss of serpents slithering across the bones of men. The world belonged to her now, and yet, whispers speak of one last truth, carried by the wind like a curse. She was never alone. There are others like her, waiting beneath the ear. And when the time comes, they will rise. The age of men is over. The age of the Serpent Queen has begun.